Yeah. Yes.
Chairman, you've gone live. No kissing in the aisle.
Okay, I'll start again. The Finance, Economic Development and Corporate Services Overview and Scrutiny Committee, 29th of June, and it's 10:30. So as per the agenda, do we have any comments from members of the public?
Not that I'm aware of.
There are no comments from members of the public. Do we have any apologies for absence?
We have apologies from Councillor Bob Adams, and we think we received apologies for Councillor Charmaine Morgan because she's working nights apparently.
Okay, those two apologies are noted. Thank you. Do we have any disclosures of interest in the room? Are there any disclosures of interest in the room? Okay, as a reminder, you're able to disclose interest at any stage during the meeting. Item 4, action notes of the meeting held on the 23rd of February 2021. Are there any comments on the action notes of the meeting held on the 23rd of February 2021? Okay, so if there are no comments on those action notes, do I have a proposer for those notes? And a seconder? Thank you. All those in favour that this is a true and accurate record? Any against? Okay, that's carried. That's reflected as a true and accurate record of that meeting. Updates from the previous meeting. Item 5. Are there any comments on the updates from the previous meeting, pages 15 to 19? Are there any comments in the room? Councillor Ian Stokes.
Thank you. Just wondering if there's any further information on the planning item. It says a meeting is to be confirmed. And the last one, the work programme is ongoing. Presumably that's always going to be ongoing.
Sorry, which specific point are you talking about there?
At the top of page 18, if you move it sideways, it says the Cabinet Member for Housing and Planning brings a report to this committee on the issue of the delivery of affordable housing in the district.
Okay, Councillor Reid.
Thank you very much, Chairman. And that's exactly where we are. We are looking into the report that will be coming forward. It needs to take into account the stock condition report when we have that as well. And that is why the meeting at this moment in time is not confirmed. Yes, where this item is concerned, it is a little bit mixed up between housing and planning. Obviously, that's something to do with the portfolio change, and regretfully have to admit the description that is reported here isn't very clear. However, I'm sure everybody understands where we are. Thank you.
So can we note on, for the record of the minutes that it says that Councillor Nick Robbins will update us to note when that will appear on our work plan. Can we request a written response as to when that will appear on our work plan, please? When that report will be ready. Are there any other comments? Councillor Dobson.
Thank you, Chairman. Just item 36, page 18, the Future High Streets Fund bid. Between the last committee and now, we have been awarded then the £5.6 million. And we have now just last week appointed Alex Ward as the programme manager. So that is now moving on quite swiftly, as we have 2.5 years to complete the project, and I will update the committee as things progress. Thank you.
Okay, if there are no other comments, a lot of the comments refer to the work plan, which we will come back to at the end of the meeting. Are there any other comments on the action updates? Okay, I'd like to make some progress then, please. Moving on to the item 6, the outturn position. This is with Councillor Adam Stokes.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I will introduce and then pass over to Rich to go through the report. The report in front of you, the outturn position for the financial year of 2021. I'd like to put on record my thanks to the officers throughout the council and especially the finance team who have managed to do such a fantastic job so that we do not use the budget stabilisation reserve in the forthcoming year. But now I'd like to pass over to Richard Wiles, who will now go through the report in detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Stokes. Before we get into the detail, just want to draw attention to the recommendations that are before members. The first one is to review the provisional outturn position, and it is provisional because the actual accounts are still being prepared in accordance with the statutory deadline, the 31st of July. So some of the elements may vary when we get to the actual outturn position. And the second to note is the budget carry forward will actually be a recommendation to Cabinet to consider. The reserve movements will be going to Governance and Audit Committee on the 21st of July, but the carry forwards will be going to Cabinet on the 13th of July. So the committee will be asked to review both those elements of the report today, but just to draw attention to that particular note. The other point to reference is the variance analysis on the work that's been done is comparing the budget to the amended budget, which was presented to Council in September. Ordinarily, the variance analysis work would be done comparing it to the start of the financial year, but members will recall Council were asked to consider updated budget positions in September. So the analysis has been done as a comparison to that position, which I think will largely explain why the variances are not as many as we would expect to see in an outturn report, because clearly the outturn is more closely aligned to our position as at the mid-year point. As Councillor Stokes says, and we have updated the committee throughout last financial year, I think when we came to you in February, we were forecasting a deficit of around 300. That had been brought down significantly from about 1 million earlier in that financial year. But a balanced position has been established through utilisation of the government grants and also interventions by members and officers to reduce expenditure across the authority, some of that through the way of working that's currently in place, but also in terms of interventions to prevent unnecessary expenditure. So there has been no need to use any of the reserves to balance the financial year, which obviously puts the authority in a good place going into 21-22. And also members will note that there is a recommendation to establish what we've termed a COVID recovery reserve of 1.2 million, which is made up of underutilised government funding. And the principle behind that is the use of that reserve to cushion and offset any other costs that we may see during the current financial year, and also to offset any losses in expenditure and income. Clearly, the first part of this financial year has still seen part of the lockdown and the restrictive movements of communities. So we are still seeing difficulties around arts and leisure, markets and car parking. So there are still some concerns about our budgets for this year. So the principle behind the reserve is to offset those difficult budget positions. So there's some perhaps key points of the report. It goes through, it's in a relatively structured way, each of the elements of the general fund, revenue and capital, and then the housing revenue account, revenue and capital. Probably just draw attention to some key areas and then invite questions from that. Income wise, you'll see on page, I'm going to refer to page on the paid copies, but I appreciate it might be difficult online, different figures and page numbers. But page 27, which is table 7, you'll see the updated income position as at the year end. In September, we amended our budget prediction to be 3.5 million. we actually overachieved that. We came out at just over 4 million for the year. And we also had some compensation through the income compensation scheme that the government introduced of 653,000 to offset the difference between 6.2 at the start of the year and our reset position of 3.5. The table above is for information, gives members some visibility of the type and number of grants that were either being received directly by the authority or being asked to be passported through the authority. So you'll see the business grants there at that point at the end of March, £42 million worth of grants were passed through the council to qualifying businesses. And all around that, you'll see all the various grants that the government awarded to the council, leisure recovery grant, cultural recovery grant, and some of the grants that we then used to offset expenditure. So a whole variation of different grants and different conditions attached to each of those grants as well. In terms of capital position, for the general fund, the overall outturn, less the carry forwards that were approved in March at council, 3.2 million budget and a 2.2 million outturn position, so £1 million variance, and explanations for the variances are part of the appendices. And in terms of the reserves themselves, just a couple of areas to note. There's a request to replenish the maintenance reserve, which is used to principally fund unforeseen expenditure pressures on the general fund assets. And our recommendation today is to top that back up to £500,000 for 21-22. Confirmed that the budget stabilisation reserve has not been utilised or needed to be utilised as part of the outturn arrangements, and indeed council topped that back up at the March meeting as well. Replenish the IT investment reserve. Principally, that's to help support the hybrid model of working. Members will be aware, if they go into the offices at the moment, a lot of the desks are completely clear as staff were asked to take pieces of IT equipment home to set up home working arrangements. As we move back into a hybrid of people coming back into the office as well as having a home base, we clearly need to replenish the IT offer back into the offices. So there's a request to make monies available to enable that to happen over the coming weeks. And then finally, in terms of disabled facilities grants, confirmation that the underspend on that particular grant arrangement has been put into the housing delivery reserve to help support ongoing demand for disabled adaptation. So 362,000 has been is recommended to go into the housing delivery reserve to fund that. In terms of the governance reserves, of which there are just over £5 million, no particular requirements to utilise any of those particularly, and confirmation the special expense areas have got their own individual reserve balances which help fund ongoing expenditure in those areas and also to help fund initiatives for each of those for special expenses across the district. In terms of the working balance, this is still part of the provisional work in progress that's been underway at the moment. So the outturn may impact on that balance, and also confirmation that Section 31 grants, which is where the government was reimbursing the council for the reliefs it was giving to businesses, will be carried over into 21-22, which is relevant for that financial year. So that area is still a little bit work in progress, Mr. Chairman, as we complete the outturn work for the year. For the housing revenue account, there were some previous cabinet recommendations around, approvals around carry forwards, and they are in the Appendix H for members to look at. Members will recall a stock condition survey was approved by council to take forward a comprehensive stock survey. So £780,000 will be carried into the new financial year to enable those costs to be met. But the HRA in total, whilst it's seen some difficulties around rent collection, £500,000 down from our budget that we set, most of the expenditure has been broadly in line, except for those carry forwards that I've referred to. The HRA capital programme was significantly reduced down as part of that amended budget work. So 16.1 million was the amended budget from a previously a higher figure. about 25 million. The outturn is 3.1 million, which I think, as Councillor Reid has said on previous meetings, a deliberate requirement to pause during 2021 the house build programme to enable that to be rebased in the context of the financial challenges the HRA was facing. So you can see that outturn is 13 million variance for those reasons. The working balance, I think we've previously expressed concerns about the level of the working balance. So during the outturn work, we've taken the opportunity to replenish that reserve back up to a balance of 2.3. The policy is 10% of the operating expenditure of the HRA is roughly the working balance level we want to see. So the expenditure level is really about 2.5, should be around 2.5, 2.6 as a kind of guide. So we're just slightly below that, but we have taken steps to improve the working balance position of it. Right to buys, unsurprisingly, were lower than we would expect to see. There were 29 during the year. We'd normally see around 60. That's probably unsurprising given difficulties with people accessing mortgages and the inability of some people to meet the criteria to exercise their right to buy. So that has reduced down during the year, but it has significantly increased over this first period. We're in excess of 20 already for this financial year. So that's just a momentary position that we found ourselves in during that year. So the receipts reserve is standing at 8 million and the major repairs reserve standing at nearly 18 million. So from a reserve position, I think if you look at the appendices, you'll see a relatively static position for the HRA in overall terms, due to the fact that the revenue position was relatively stable. And as I've said, the new build ambitions were deferred, so there was no real drawdown on the reserve balances. I'll pause there, Mr. Chairman, to invite questions, but that's just a summary of the overall position. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. I propose that we start by taking questions on the overall accounts and then focus in on the recommendations of the budget carry forwards. So does anybody have any questions? Noted. Is there anybody on the committee that has any questions first? Okay, I will open it up and then I'll come back with my own questions. Councillor Ashley Baxter.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation, Richard. I'm struggling to find the page number, but we appear to be underspent by £12 million on housing growth. Part of the explanation was the housing rollout programme that was presented to Governance and Audit in November. So I wonder if either Richard or Adam Stokes or Robert could encourage me that we're going to catch up on the £12 million of spending that we are behind, whether we are going to build any new houses this year, and if so, have we put any planning permission in for any houses this year? In short, we didn't spend £12 million last year. It was a difficult year. How are we going to make that right? How are we going to put that right?
I think it's a valid question. It's slightly off topic for this review of accounts, and I think this committee would probably welcome a report on this. But Councillor Reid, do you want to comment on that briefly? And if you think that it merits a more detailed report than a short answer, then I'm happy to add that to the work plan.
I can answer reasonably shortly. Thank you, Chairman. I note the concerns. I note the concerns of Ashley Baxter ongoing, and they're right to be there. We have recently, only in the last couple of weeks, had a meeting with myself there and with Adam Stokes with his finance hat on there, and we have looked at the new build programme. We have Swinegate ready to go to planning at this moment in time. We have Wellington Way, which is market deeping, which is reasonably well prepared. We have housing on Shore Road, which of course is neighbours, the new amenity site for our waste collections, etc. We have recommended that Swinegate comes to planning because we are ready on that. The other two, I'm waiting to balance exactly where we are. Has been said, the stock condition survey will be completed by October. And when I'm there, I will be happy to sort of make forward movements. But I'm a little bit nervous at this moment in time because I need to balance our existing stock and its needs for both capital and repair expenditure, along with new growth. But Swinegate is coming to planning, and it's in the agenda.
I think it is a valid observation. I think it's slightly off topic for this report, but I think Mark and I would welcome that on the work plan as a more strategic look as to how we make capital expenditure and how we project plan that over the next, not months, but years, basically. I think that's a useful point for the work plan. Does anybody in the room have any questions on the report? Okay, I have a few basic questions. Richard, how many staff did we furlough? Page 27, we claimed 331,000 on furlough.
40, 45, something like that. It's mainly
around about 45, and they were all in the arts.
Mainly the arts, some building control officers during the early part of the pandemic, but majority throughout has been the arts centre staff. Casual.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to jump around a bit. Page 29, the bottom of page 29, there is a COVID recovery reserve of £1.249 million, not a small amount of money. What specifically is that for, and who's going to be managing that pot of cash?
Thank you. The majority of that monies have come from unused tranches of government funding. So on the previous page, you'll see tranches 1 to 4, government support for council, 1.793 million was awarded. This is the residual balance that has not been required during the year. So from an accounting perspective, it's not been needed as at 31st of March. So the proposal is to roll it into this financial year to carry on supplementing difficulties we might have in the budget framework. The proposal is, in terms of the governance around that, the proposal is that authority be given to the Cabinet Member for Finance in consultation with the 151 and the Chief Executive to access that funding based on an established criteria of where those difficulties in the budget may arise from. So at this point in time, that's hard to anticipate directly where they'll be, but the thinking at this moment is where we've seen difficulties in this year, particularly around our income losses, but also where we might need to bring resource in to help put services back on track in terms of any transformation work or any commercial work. The idea is that that fund will be used to fast track some of those. So at the moment, the governance will sit with cabinet member and statutory officers to use that funding.
So the criteria around spending that money has not yet been defined, but will be defined. Okay, can I request that that's written to us as to what the criteria is around that? It's a large sum of money, and be interesting to kind of understand how that is employed. Just moving on, 37, forgive my ignorance, what is a co-payment loss? Co-payment losses contribution was significantly down. I don't actually know what that is.
Sorry, so the co-payment losses is reference to the compensation scheme that the government introduced for income losses. So basically, I think it's referenced earlier in the report on page 27, just above table 7. The income loss scheme was where the government would reimburse authorities for 75 pence for every £1 lost due to difficulties in their income. So our forecast at the time which this scheme was first introduced was 1.4 million, but we actually were only able to access 653,000. That's because the criteria for the income losses was also restricted by where councils access other funding. They were taken off the amount of funding you could get through this scheme. So, for example, because we used furlough and we accessed other grants, we weren't able to effectively claim twice. So.
Okay, that's clear. That Thank you for that clarification. I suppose my main observation about this report in general, looking at it, is that we've saved money in rather a lot of areas over the last year. I mean, if you look at, just one that jumps off the page is there's £146,000 saving on page 41. There are huge savings all over the report, and the wheels haven't come off of the council, and so it strikes me that there are hundreds of thousands, or certainly tens of thousands of pounds of new ways of working that we can look at here. Some of which are obviously not going to apply going forward, but some of them might apply going forward. Is there an analysis of new ways of working based upon the lessons of the last 18 months that we can look at as a committee using our corporate services remit?
Yeah, I mean, certainly CMT, there's two other colleagues here today, have been working on capturing the positive learning from this current way of working. Like you said, we've got a kind of hybrid model where we've got some staff that come into the buildings, but principally most staff are working off site. Recovery processes have still happened. We've still been delivering services in key areas of the authority without any detrimental impact on service standards. And clearly you can see there some of the operational traditional ways that we used to do some of the business haven't been able to be done, but without any detrimental impact. So CMT have been definitely considering how we can capture that learning and make sure that if and when staff start coming back into the building after the 19th of July, we don't just inherit those practices that we had previously, because that's become a traditional way that we don't want to encourage coming back. So there is work around this that we could bring back to the committee at a future date to make sure, particularly as we're getting into budget setting season, what we don't want to be doing is resetting those budgets back to those higher levels if we don't need to do that.
Yeah, I'd welcome that. I think that there are tens of thousands of pounds of saving in here, some of which are entirely unique for last year, but some of which I think we can learn from and bring into our business practices going forward. Okay, moving on. I'd like to move on to item 2, which is of this report, which is to review and recommend Sorry, Councillor Knowles, do you want to put your microphone on?
Sorry, beg your pardon. I was going to bring it up for item 10 work programme, but it refers to something that's on 31. I'm sorry, it's very parochial, and it's on 4.8. There's a Bourne special expense area is 33,000 reserve, which is more than the normal spend in a year for Bourne SEA. When Stanford when the SEA for Deepings were withdrawn, it was promised then we'd look at the other SEAs, in particular Bourne. They provide very few services within that. It's just 2 fields in effect. And we said that we would discuss looking at removing the Bourne SEA and transferring those responsibilities to Bourne Town Council. I was going to bring it up, and when is that going to happen? It doesn't appear to be in the work programme at this stage. I was going to bring it up. I don't know if it's appropriate to bring it up at this stage.
Okay, I think we're happy to add that to the work programme in the autumn. I think, or we'll take advice from the finance team, but I think the autumn is the sensible time to do that. Unless you want, do you want to comment on that, Richard?
Yes. So I accept the point, but of course this special purpose area has been created because at that time town council weren't taking this, so clearly the districts intervened, but clearly the direction of travel is different, then that's cool. That's the will of the council.
Councillor Knowles?
Yes, thank you. But if we start the budget process in September, it'll all be gone. Another year gone past before we even consider it. And if we have another meeting to consider it, and then it goes on, and then we have discussions, it's going to drag on forever. And we made the point 18 months ago that this needed looking at, because the quality of the work receives substantial criticism, and on many occasions it's received substantial criticism. And we believe as a Bourne Town Council that we can do it better, certainly better than it's being done at the moment. And it's
Right.
been talked about for 2 years since I joined this council, and nothing's happened.
Thank you. Councillor Stokes, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so I'll take that back, Councillor Knowles. We'll have that discussion before the next meeting, so we know where we're going with it.
Thanks for that point. Are there any other comments on this report? Okay, so I'd like to move on to item 2 of this report, which is to review and recommend to Cabinet, not the Governance and Audit Committee, but to Cabinet, the budget carry forwards on appendices D and H. Does anybody in the room have any comments on the budget carry forwards in appendices D and H?
Can I just to help members, could I just make a comment on the context of why this is being asked for? So principally, this is due to programmes of work that will have carried over into 21-22 for fairly obvious reasons in terms of why some of these things are being delayed. What we've tried to do is give you a summary of how the funding of these will be arrived at. So on the top of page 51, you'll see the summary. Most of these are coming from reserves, so there is no impact on the taxpayer. There's no impact on the level of council tax that's already been set. So what we're seeking to do is just move those budgets that have been set within the financial year to ask them to be carried across into 21-22. And they're both for capital and revenue. So appendix D is for the general fund and appendix H is for the housing revenue account. But the principle is the same on each of those elements. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Are there any comments or questions from the committee? Councillor Whittington.
Yes, thank you very much indeed, Richard, for the report. Yeah, I've going through appendix. Obviously, I appreciate the reason why, you know, because of COVID and work streams haven't taken place and whatever, that the budgets are being carried forward into this financial year. Just even a comment really, just obviously, as well as the carry forwards, we've also got stuff that's in this year's programme as well. Just a little bit of assurance or comment around, have we got sufficient capacity within the authority to both undertake this year's work, but also to catch up on all of the work that we missed during COVID. Thanks. Thank you.
Richard.
Well, yeah, I think that kind of echoes what I was saying around the COVID recovery reserve, to be fair, that there is genuine anxiousness that the work programme, if we're taking programmes from 2021 into this financial year, and we've already got baked into this year new work programmes and new initiatives, there is a concern that have we got the capacity in the key parts of the organisation to deliver both? And I think that's why that reserve may become very useful to us, that we might have to just inject some temporary resource into some key parts of the organisation to enable both to be delivered.
Okay, are there any other questions? Councillor Dilks.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the first page of Appendix D, there's a £66,000 proposed budget carry forward for funding of St Martin's Park master planning. I thought the master planning would have been complete by this stage, and you know, certainly it was due to come to a planning committee for approval of the plan in April, I think it was, but there was a delay to it, so it's been shelved. But the point is, I'm just saying, you know, what is that money for, please?
Yeah, the St Martin's Park developments, Chairman, hasn't yet fulfilled all of the planning requirements, so there's still work ongoing with consultants to work with colleagues to enable it to come back to a planning committee at a future date. There's some questions raised around the viability of the schemes in terms of the right mix of tenure and property types. So there is still work ongoing on that. So we are still incurring external costs to bring that forward to the planning committee for further consideration.
I suppose Phil's question is, do we expect that to be spent in the next year?
I would suggest we do, yeah.
Okay, are there any other questions from the committee? Okay, so if I can have a proposer to propose these carry forwards. Councillor Whittington and somebody to second. Councillor Knowles. All those in favour? Any against? Okay, that is carried. Thank you very much, everyone. Okay, moving forward on the agenda. Item 7, the Local Council Tax Support Scheme. This is with Councillor Adam Stokes.
Yeah, again, I'm going to pass over to Claire Moses in a moment, but obviously this report comes to you every year as a committee because we're reviewing the council's local council tax support scheme in advance of the financial year 22-23. And we do seek your comments regarding any potential changes to the scheme for public consultation. I'm sure there'll be lots of conversations, especially when we get to Appendix 2. But I shall pass over to Claire, who will go through the report as the Head of Revenues and Benefits. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Stokes. Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to draw members to the recommendations on page 63 of the report. The first recommendation is the committee are asked to comment on the current scheme and put forward any proposed changes for finance modelling. The second recommendation is to agree to recommend to Cabinet the continuation of the discretionary payment scheme of £30,000 per year. And recommendation 3 is to agree the finance modelling that will be arising as a result of this meeting to come back to this committee on the 20th of July for consideration for consultation with the public. As Councillor Stokes has advised, this report does come to the committee each year. We are required to review our council tax support scheme on an annual basis, and this is to ensure that our scheme is fair to our residents and that it provides the support that is needed and is in line with the budget requirements each year. The scheme for 2022-23 is going to be one of a difficult scheme, mainly because of the impacts that we've seen with regards to COVID. There's a wide-ranging set of competing and sometimes conflicting objectives that we need to consider, and that's more so this year. These are provided in paragraph 1.4 of the report. We need to consider the impact of the National Welfare Benefit System, the council tax budget capacity, our collection rates, the economy and demographics, particularly around the impacts of furlough. Currently, furlough impacts won't be known until September when the scheme comes to an end. So there's some estimation work that needs to be undertaken with regards to that. Our caseload, so since the impact of COVID, our caseload has increased significantly. We are seeing a small reduction as people are returning back to work, but we do expect that this will increase again once we see those impacts of furlough. We have the council objectives and then any other council comparisons, which, as Councillor Stokes mentioned, are in Appendix 2 to the report. The impacts of COVID are further mentioned from paragraph 1.6, and it does show in paragraph 1.9 the financial impact that this has had. In 2021, the cost of the scheme was 7.2 million, and that was an increase at the same point in 2019 at 6.5 million, so an increase of just under £700,000. And that is a pure impact of the COVID restrictions that were put in place, and as a result of more people in receipt of universal credit and therefore being passported onto our council tax support scheme. This has been a national impact, but the council tax schemes across the country are varied. And again, that is shown in Appendix 2 for the authorities within Lincolnshire. There are varied schemes across the districts. With regards to our scheme for next financial year, there are a number of options that we could consider as part of the public consultation, and they are detailed in paragraphs 1.18 and in particular in table in paragraph 1.19. In looking at these options for consideration, officers have had a look at the other schemes across Lincolnshire and have determined those areas that seem to be a relatively common theme. These common themes also represent national schemes. So the first change that could be modelled financially, and this is on page 67 of the report, the maximum award currently for our scheme is 80%. So a person would receive 80% of their entitlement of their council tax liability. The schemes across the county range from 100% entitlement to 70%. We could model any of those in increments of 5%. The second change is a reduction of the capital limit. Currently, the capital limit is £16,000, and again, we could reduce that with the intention that people that are that have got capital could use that to provide for their shortfall for any reduction in award. Change 3 is a property banding cap. At the moment, council tax support can be applied for regardless of the person's band. Some authorities do restrict banding. From within Lincolnshire, there's restrictions of a band A all the way through to a band H. So for example, if the restriction was at a band B, then the council tax would be paid at the band B level, regardless of the banding through from C to H. The fourth change is an increase the minimum entitlement per week. So currently we award any value of council tax support, regardless of a de minimis amount. We could increase that to advise that we would only pay council tax support to a certain value. So for example, we would only pay up to £2 a week. If the award is less than £2 a week, there's non-payment. There are implications of that with regards to adjustments on their council tax bills. What it would mean is that there would be no cost of adjusting the council tax bill if the award was under the minimum entitlement, and we wouldn't be reissuing adjusted council tax bills regularly throughout the year. The fifth change is with regards to universal credit. Each month, anybody in receipt of universal credit have their award reassessed because it's reassessed based on income. So if they have fluctuating income, we then receive a notification and we have to reassess their council tax support. Currently, for anybody that's in this circumstance, they do have a 12 reassessments of their council tax support within the year. The implication of that is that they have 12 new council tax bills, and by the time the council tax bill goes out, they are given 14 days for their instalment. The instalment is then due, and by the time it's due, we could be reassessing their council tax again. So we are finding that for some of our universal credit customers, we're getting towards the end of the financial year and they haven't gone into our recovery process. So they're not aware of any instalment that is outstanding, and we have small balances outstanding at the end of the year, which we then have to collect. The final change is with regards to national incentives. This is something that would be prudent to include because it does allow for taking into account the last financial year where there's been impacts of COVID and there's been national incentives to support our customers, such as the hardship schemes, so that we don't include any grants or any other income to help with these impacts within a council tax support assessment. These are just some of the proposed changes. With regards to the next steps, the consultation process is shown in paragraph 2 of the report, and the timetable is in 2.2. So after this committee, the next meeting is on the 20th of July, where we'll be able to bring back the financial modelling of the changes that can be proposed for the consultation process. August to October would be public consultation and will include analysis of the results. 23rd of November, we would return to this committee to review the outcome of the consultation and the proposed scheme for 2022-23. 7th of December, Cabinet with a recommendation of the scheme to Council, which would then be on the 27th of January 2022. We are required to ensure that our scheme is fully approved by the 31st of January each financial year. That is the summary of my report, and I'd like to invite any questions.
Okay, are there any questions from the committee, please? Councillor Ian Stokes.
Yes, it seems a very comprehensive thing to discuss. I can't see that there's much to discuss because next time it's coming back again. But I will note that on 123, I think there's a typing error. It should say 2022-23 and not 2022-13 as on the actual paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, through you. I did notice that as I was reading the report. So thank you, Councillor Stokes, for bringing that to my attention. I'll ensure that's amended.
Are there any other questions from the committee? Councillor Whittington.
Yeah, thanks. So just to clarify, Claire, so my understanding of this is that looking at all of the potential changes on page 67 and 68, so they want us to decide which ones we'd like to see modeled through for the next meeting. Is that correct? Sorry.
Thank you, through you, Chairman. The changes on those pages are changes that we can consider for financial modelling, and we have put these forward because they are part of the other Lincolnshire authorities schemes. They are changes that have been applied nationally throughout other schemes, so can be easily modelled to give an indication that if we were to adopt these as part of the consultation, the financial impacts that they would have. So for this committee, it would be to agree that we can model these and also provide comment for any other potential changes for modelling.
Richard, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, just really to help clarify, Mr. Chairman, because I appreciate there's a lot of information in this report, and for some members it may not be particularly obvious what's being asked for. What I think what we're trying to say is that clearly this scheme has a large discretionary element to it. Our scheme is relatively unchanged and has been since its inception in 2013. It's held as well, it's fit for purpose. But when you do compare it alongside our neighbours, there are variations. And I think there's over 100 different variations and combinations that we could model. We have the software to do it. So what we're looking for, the committee today may say they're perfectly happy with the scheme as is. And that's perfectly legitimate position to take. Or they may want us to go away and model all these different elements that Claire's gone through, and we can bring back the financial impacts of each of those. The committee can then decide they want to abandon those, or they can decide they want to see those go through to consultation. So the purpose of today is to get a steer as to where the committee feel, if they want to do changes to the scheme, where those changes need to be done, and we can go away and model the implication of that. So there's no commitment being made, it's just to give the steer for us this morning.
Fine, that's understood. Councillor Dilks.
Yeah, thank you. Just on that point though, Richard, I'd read and understood in the report that all the options were going to come back with the financial implications. That's not the case, is it? You just want to restrict it to those that we particularly are interested? No.
What we're looking for is the committee's preference to
Sure.
model.
Yeah, so the finance team are looking for steerage on this. Do you have a question, Councillor Dilks?
I do, thank you. Thank you for that. It was just on paragraph 117, mentions the reduction for special constables who live in the district that we adopted for this year. I just wondered, when we come back for the July meeting, I just wondered if we could get some information on the uptake so far for that concession, and the cost of it to the council. And just sort of in passing, did we only adopt that for 1 year? Do we have to sort of adopt it for each year, or can we do it for a period, for three years, for example,
As has been said in the presentation, the scheme will come back on an annual basis, so that'll be part of the scheme proposals going forward. Just to note that actually this is a very relevant topic, because the police authority have not yet stipulated the rollout of this particular scheme, and that's Lincolnshire wide. So no authority has yet been able to implement that scheme on a local level, because we're still waiting for the police authority to articulate exactly how the scheme should work.
Which is a bit bizarre, I've got to say, because it was them that promoted it in the first place, or not the police authority, but the PCC.
But fine, that's noted. Are there any other questions on the committee? Councillor Knowles.
Thank you, Chair. it seems that amongst the changes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 would appear to be a piece of work that is done more than once, or maybe done more than once during the course of the year. And I'm wondering if this is unnecessary, as it causes, at the end of the day, an anomaly with regard to payment and to debt, or chasing debt. And that seems particularly important, that we can reduce the necessary amount of work without too much effect on people, so that they're not adversely affected too much. And we could look at that one in particular, I think, as very important. I'd like to look at some of the other things as well, like the capital limit and the banding, but certainly change 5, if it can reduce work and it can reduce problems at the end of the work that's done, then I think we ought to seriously consider that.
Okay, that's noted. I have a number of comments. Are there any other, on a similar point, are there any other comments on the committee? Okay, I have a number of questions. Item 1.4, the scheme is set based upon some conflicting objectives. I would also add into this list the direction of travel of our neighbouring authorities. I think some level of dialogue needs to happen with our neighbouring authorities as to where they're moving. Rising wages, inflation, and also the cost of enforcement. I mean, there are no numbers in this report as to how much we're spending on enforcement. If enforcement is rocketing and the cost of, getting £1 is out of enforcement channels is £2, we're obviously got the wrong scheme. If a cost of getting £2 in recovery is £1, then we've got the right scheme. So I think I'd really like to understand more about enforcement, which I think is the missing data in this. Moving on to the schemes, thanks for explaining them. I'm not sure I fully understood them, but I'm grateful for your explanation. It strikes me as change 1 and change 2 look to be the easiest to model. Change 3, capping the council tax band, that sounds to me like a subsidy on big properties, which I think this country subsidises big properties too much. So I'm not sure I would welcome increasing subsidies on big properties. Just because you're in a big property, that shouldn't mean you get an extra discount. So I'm not sure I'm comfortable with change 3, because I think that's the wrong direction of travel. Change 4 is an interesting one. Change 5, that strikes me as there's natural it may be more work for us, but changing somebody's council tax bill when their financial circumstances change, there's some natural justice in that, and I'm not sure I would like to see that reversed. That's kind of us putting our hands on our hips and saying, we're not going to do any work because your personal circumstances has changed. I wouldn't welcome that change. I think that there's natural justice in us doing more work based upon people's financial changes, and people's financial changes change for the they improve as well as decline. So I don't welcome change 5 at all. Change 6. Impact of national incentives. I'm guessing this is national incentives in the future. I'm not sure how you could model that unless you've got a crystal ball in the finance department. How would you manage that? That strikes me as quite strange. If you can comment on those, they're all the comments I have. But yeah, so I would welcome the ones that are easier to model. My overwhelming comment is turmoil is the new normal, and data is knowledge and knowledge is power. So we should be modelling these, but I wouldn't welcome all these changes. No, I think some of them breach natural justice or feel like a subsidy on expensive properties, which I don't think is the correct direction of travel. If you can comment on those, please. Thanks.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, a few clarifications and maybe apologies if I haven't explained correctly, particularly around the larger properties. So if I can start on the national incentives. Currently in our council tax support scheme, we don't allow for anything that includes to disregard additional support that people receive. So last year, people received, for example, a £500 test and trace payment if they had a positive.
So that's done in past tense, basically. It's not. It's obviously you can't model what might happen.
No, but what it does allow for is that if we had a similar circumstance in the future, or the government said that they were going to have an incentive to give everybody an extra £100 in the country, for example, we wouldn't take that £100 into account when assessing their income, so that nobody's worse off for government incentives.
Okay, yeah, I think that's okay. I understand that. I think that is useful to model. Okay, are there any other? Do you have any other comments on what on my comments?
Yes, I was just going to comment on the universal credit and the banding. So for universal credit, again, it could be a positive change for our customer. What we can say is that if they don't have, if their change is within a certain range, so say between £0 and £10. So if their universal credit goes up by £9 a week, we wouldn't change their council tax support. So they'll get more universal credit, but we wouldn't change their council tax support scheme. What we would do is we'd have a look and see what de minimis we would want to set to make sure that it is worth issuing that council tax bill for that change. It goes in reverse. So if the council tax, the universal credit goes down, then we would reassess the council tax support to ensure that the customer is better off. So it's always making sure that our customers, our residents are better off. With regards to the council tax band, a clarification around that is that if somebody, say we set a banding restriction at a band B, if they're in a band H, we will only pay up to the band B level of council tax. At the moment, we pay up to the band H level. So we would restrict the amount that we pay.
Yeah, so that's a subsidy on big properties, isn't it? That's a greater discount based upon the size of the property.
No, sorry. So say, for example, a band H at the moment, it isn't, but for example, it's £2,000, then we currently pay up to that amount. But if we restrict it to a band B, that for example is £1,200, we would only pay up to the £1,200. So that £800 that's remaining, it would be for the resident to pay that themselves. It wouldn't be paid through council tax support.
Okay. So that sounds as if it would. So it's basically, okay, I read it the wrong way around effectively. Okay, so that does sound as if it would be worth modelling. Councillor Whittington.
Yeah, I think looking through these, I'm minded to support changes 1 through to 5 on the basis that they're of, in regards to sort of 6. I think, Claire, you've explained some of the problems around that. I mean, if we decide to ask you to model through changes 1 to 5 without prejudice, so in effect, we're not making any decision today as to what we're going to support and what we're not going to support. But we just want to see what the numbers look like and what the impact could be. So the next meeting, based on those numbers, we can then have a better choice and decision, so we can make the final decision then. I think that's, I'm seeing nods of head from all the members of the committee as well.
I think, do you mean 1 through to 5 or 1 through to 6?
1 through to 5, because I think Claire's said the 6 is difficult, not unless Claire wants to do a little bit of modelling around that as well. I mean, I'd be happy to see 6 as well, but it just depends on, I think, what Claire says on that. Thanks.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. 6 really is to future-proof the scheme. So there wouldn't necessarily be modelling. It would just be a paragraph within our scheme that says that if there are future incentives and our residents do receive an additional amount of income through those incentives, we just wouldn't include it within the assessment of a council tax award.
Fine. Councillor Adam Stokes.
Okay, thank you. No, we just, I'm just wondering if you could give us a steer as well on the percentages you would like to look at change 1 and 2 and the amount on change 2, because the finance team could model every percentage between 70 and 100, but I don't think that would be productive work. So I'm just wondering what sort of levels as a committee you'd be interested in looking at.
Councillor Whittington.
Yeah, I think looking at it, would increments of 5% be acceptable to everybody? Up or down? I mean, you know, at the moment we're we're 80%. So if you look at 70, 75, 80, 85, 90, 9500, because then there should be a pattern in terms of those increments. So we could then probably have a guess if we decided on, I don't know, 78%, you could kind of almost look at the difference between 75 and 80 and have a rough guess, if that means. But I'm thinking if we look at 10% increments, then maybe it's a bit too big, so maybe 5% increments would be the best approach.
Okay, can you also comment on my point about enforcement metrics? That I think that that's a really important measure here. Now, we know that obviously most of the hits being taken by LCC rather than ourselves, but there's a cost of enforcement here that is the bit I think that's missing. At the same time, I would definitely welcome the fact that this is the first time we've seen a thorough analysis and comparison of our neighbouring authorities, which I remember for the last few years, I've complained that we've not received that. And so I really welcome Appendix 2, which is a really good analysis of what our neighbours are doing. But I think we're missing the enforcement information.
Thank you, Chairman. When we bring the report back on the 20th of July for each of the modelling scenarios, we will include a non-payment amount. So there will be a non-collection figure in there, and we'll be able to give some context around that at the meeting on the 20th of July.
Councillor Whittington.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. In terms of reduction in the capital limits on change 2, it says the limit is 16,000 and you're looking for some guidance on increments. I'm suggesting perhaps to the committee, other committee like it in 500s or thousands. I'll leave it open to that. But I think I prefer 500s, but it depends what other members of the committee would like to see on that one.
So the Lincolnshire range on that, I think, goes all the way up to 30,000. Is that right? So I think 500s would strike me as quite. I think 1,000 is probably fine. Councillor Knowles.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask a question? If most of the pain passes on to Lincolnshire, but if there is any money we cannot collect, do we stand all that pain, or is some of that pain passed on to Lincolnshire as well?
Richard.
Sorry, Chair, could I just go back a couple of stages as well, just to clarify the point that the higher the percentage becomes, so we're at 80, so if we go 85, 90, then clearly the residual balance becomes less, which directly impacts on the comment you're making about non-collection. So there will be a correlation between the higher our element becomes, the more difficult we'll end up with very small residual balances that frankly probably just go straight to write-off because it's not worth trying to trace £60. So that's something just to be mindful of. The other element around comparisons with districts, of course, districts will be going through the same work as well. So it is a moving target all the time. As we look across our neighbours, they'll be having exactly the same conversations. So there may be changes they're making to their scheme that we won't be cited on at the time at which we're doing our modelling. And while we're changing parameters, changing 1 and 2, of course, what we're kind of asking, just mindful of the complexity of the information that will be coming back. So for every variation on that 80% you're asking us to look at, every change you're making on those caps will be positioned against each of those variations. So just be very mindful that we could end up with a lot of information that's going to come back to you, which probably will make it slightly more confusing than it is this morning. But we're perfectly able to make those models. It's just how we get them into a position that makes it sensible for yourselves. But just going back to the point that Councillor Knowles is making, then absolutely, if we can't collect £100, for argument's sake, we will hit 9% of that non-collection as our cost. So it goes through the collection fund, and then that bad debt is proportioned across all the major preceptors. So they'll all take their proportionate loss in accordance with their element of the tax bill. So, yeah.
Okay, fine. Are there any other comments? I believe you've received some guidance there. Councillor Whittington.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'm guessing what you're saying, Richard, is potentially going to be some very, very complex spreadsheets that are likely to come forward to us. I'm just wondering if would the committee be happy if myself and the chairman were to review some of these spreadsheets, some of these models before the meeting? Would that be acceptable to people, and then come back with perhaps to sort of maybe refine some of it, or any member that wished to see them, obviously we're more than happy to share them if they wanted to have an input into it. But I'm just thinking about saving time at the next meeting, going through complex spreadsheets, and maybe a little bit of initial pre-review might solve some of that. Thanks.
And usually I'm happy to be signed up for work in this case. So yeah, I'm happy to do that. Are there any other comments on the committee just to make that report a little bit more digestible? But I think knowledge is power, and I think that the more data, the better. We'll refine it for the report, but and I'm happy for any committee member to have eyesight on that if you should so wish. Okay, are there any other comments on this report or on this piece of analysis? No? Okay, I'd like to make some progress, please. Moving on to point 8, progress on the new complaint system. This is with Alan Robinson. Alan.
Thank you, Chairman. So, as I explained, the monitoring officer is not with us today, so I am a late substitute. So please bear with me on these matters. But I have been able to get an update from the team, and I'll try and relay that to members. As you know, the housing complaints process is under review right now, and that's because the housing ombudsman has really been very clear about the way housing complaints need to be dealt with, and we need to have a complaint system that, for the housing team particularly, that aligns to the requirements of the housing ombudsman. So that means it will need to become a 2-stage process, which currently, for right across the council, we have a 3-stage process. So work is ongoing with that, particularly around housing, and that is expected to go to cabinet in the near future for a decision. So that's the first part. But we obviously also have our other complaints processes and other feedback processes, which again are under review. And I was able to meet with the team last week to review the progress on that. And it makes sense really to try and align all our complaints to a very similar process, rather than have a 2-stage process, one for HRA and one for the rest of the council services. So that's the current proposal. And again, with the current time frame that I've seen, the current timeline runs us to approval at cabinet in September, Chairman. So hopefully you should see something there. Obviously, there was some concern at previous meetings around the kind of data and the learning from complaints. So already work has been done. We're not waiting to get these things approved to try and improve the workflows and the way that we understand and get the lessons learned from complaints. So those changes have already been made, but they were made kind of at the end of April. So at the moment, there isn't any meaningful data to bring you, Chairman, but we hope we'll be able to have some of that. So things around the type and frequency of complaints, the reason for those, how they've been resolved, and in addition to that, the lessons we can learn and how we pass that across the whole organisation to ensure we improve our services to the public. I haven't got anything else to add, Chairman, but I'm happy to try and answer questions.
Councillor Dilks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Alan, for the comments. It's just on the process. Mr. Robinson suggested it'd go to cabinet next, and I just thought, you know, we don't know what's going to cabinet. In the interest of pre-scrutiny, I just wonder if we've got that meeting in July next month, it should come here, or is it practical that it can come here first before it goes to cabinet? Is that the way it should be done? Thank you.
Alan, I was going to ask about what when the detail of that report would be ready and when we get eyesight on this, on a more formal report. Are you suggesting that would be before or after cabinet?
Well, certainly I would expect that would be before. So the timeline is for it to come here. Whether it comes here, so a lot of the things for the HRA probably go through one of the other committees, but we can bring something here because I know that one is close to completion. So I can work with my colleague, the Director of Housing and Property, to bring something forward.
Councillor Whittington.
Yes, thanks, Alan. Thanks for the report. I'm presuming as well, would the Constitution Committee need to have a look at this as well? I'm speaking as in my capacity as Chairman of the Constitution Committee. Thanks.
Well, we can check that through. Obviously, we're reviewing the constitution at the moment. So if there are any requirements that are around the complaint process, I think normally it would sit outside of the constitution because that's around decision making. But if there are any changes relevant, then yes, they'd need to be fed into that committee.
Okay, so your suggestion is that this goes to Cabinet in September, and that some sort of formal report will come to us in July. Okay, are there any other questions and comments in the room? Okay, I'm grateful for that update. Thank you for that. Moving on, the corporate plan key performance indicators. This report is with Ken.
Thank you, Chairman. The report set out in front of you today is the first report to this committee of the progress of the corporate plan performance indicators, which we discussed and agreed at the previous FEDCO committee. As I say, just to highlight, these are the performance indicators in the corporate plan, and ultimately, if all of these were achieved across the council, they would be contributing to the vision to be the best district in which to live, to work, and to visit. And just to highlight, these will be coming fairly regularly to this and all committees over the life of the corporate plan. The main bulk of the report is in Appendix 1, and that sets out the current progress against performance. So as an overview of the actions in this committee, 10 of the actions are rated as green, which means that they're currently on track for delivery. 6 are rated as amber, which means they're not currently on track for delivery, but that there's a mitigation plan in place, or that if they're a KPI, they're within 10% of the target. And 1 action is rated as red, which means that at the moment it's not on track and there isn't a robust mitigation plan in place. So therefore, there's a significant threat that it won't be achieved. So that's just as a brief overview. I just want to draw attention to a few areas to highlight to the committee, some that would be important. But just to say, if there's questions about individual elements of the report, there's other officers in the room who'll be better placed to answer them than me, because obviously I've got the oversight of all these actions rather than detail on any individual one. So between us, I hope we will be able to answer them. So a couple of things then positively. So as Councillor Dobson highlighted earlier, we have now secured that over 5.5 million of funding for this Future High Streets Fund, which is obviously a huge success and a big contributor to that action. In addition, the balanced budget was set in March, which is a strong position and part of the financial resilience that we have highlighted in the corporate plan as being important to being a high-performing council. And in addition to that, the site acquisition for the depot took place in April, which is a key milestone for that project. There's some areas to highlight for the Scrutiny Committee that aren't currently green. So the action to work with local education providers to increase opportunities for learning and apprenticeships in the district is rated as red. And this is largely because the university centre isn't yet open. And although there has been some activity outside of the centre and some apprenticeships and education opportunities, that isn't on track and is a threat. And I know that there's work, as the commentary outlines, to look at how that can be used in the most beneficial way in the future for businesses and learners in the district. Second thing to highlight is around the IT investment roadmap, which is overall rated as amber, but the current progress is red. Because the plan isn't yet in place, and I know for future committees that plan is needed, so it can be brought back on track. But that might be an area that this committee wants to explore as part of its work programme, which will kind of set out the actions and the KPIs around that. Another one to highlight is around the use of local supply chain. So this is an action that we can influence rather than control. So that's rated as amber. We set ourselves a target of 60% of spend over 50k being with the local supply chain, and that growing up to 64% over the life of the corporate plan. And the last year's performance was 54%, which I say is amber. It's not red, but I know the team are undertaking work to encourage and engage local suppliers to address that. Those are just a few areas. There's obviously loads of other things in Appendix 1 that you might want to consider. The second thing is there is a second recommendation in the report, which is to amend the number of businesses supported by Invest SK to 60 for this current year. Now, obviously, as you'll see from the report, this is quite a volatile performance indicator because this year Invest SK have provided support to a huge number of businesses, largely through things like the grant distribution programme. So the target of 40 for this year ended up being obviously hugely overachieved. But the intelligence and the thinking going forward is that the future support will be more targeted and more intensive, which is why the recommendation is to change that from 80 to 60 for 2021-22. In general, just to highlight as well, we're going to be doing a review of all the performance indicators at the anniversary of the corporate plan in October, and then at that point we'll present back to committee any suggestions of changes to the indicators or the success measures. But because this has such an impact on the Invest SK business plan, we thought it was useful to bring this forward in advance of that. So I hope that helps. As I say, any questions, then myself or other officers should be able to answer them. Oh, and also just to say thank you to Ben Russell, who's sitting alongside me, for all his work in preparing this report and the support around that.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Ben. Are there any questions from the committee? From the committee first, Councillor Whittington.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Ken. I do like the new layout of the report. I think it's quite easy to follow, and I do note that in the next report we're going to see some direction of arrows, which I think is really important because it gives you sort of the sense of how things are moving forward, or hopefully all moving forward. But again, those potentially maybe slipping back, I think it would be useful because it would highlight those as well. I'm concentrating on sort of the main red one, which is working with education providers to increase opportunities. And I appreciate it's been a difficult time, obviously, with COVID and whatever, which had an impact, obviously, on the owner of the university centre. But I'm just thinking, have we, as part of this, I mean, it does refer to working with FE providers, so I'm guessing that's going to be Grantham College, and also maybe worth speaking with some of the school sixth forms as well, because I certainly do think that can't speak about other towns, but certainly my experience in Grantham is that we have a lot of very talented young people who, and I'm guessing this is going to be the same in Bourne and Stanton and Deepings as well. We have a lot of very talented young people who sort of do very well, going to school sixth form, FE colleges, whatever. But then in order to sort of achieve their career objectives, they have to sort of leave the area. So in fact, we've invested in their education through to 18, 19, and then we lose a lot of them. So obviously I'm just wondering, what can we do as well, working also with employers as well, and also with economic development, to sort of identify those sort of key skills and key subjects that would be of beneficial use to local employers, so we can almost try and retain some of our very talented young people in the area. So I'm just wondering if what work it potentially could go on around that. And I guess it's not easy, because a large part of it is going to be potentially attracting employers with those kind of high quality jobs that that we really do need to drive the economy forward. But just some comments around that, I think, would be quite useful. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Thanks, Councillor Whittington. And I think agree with all the very good points you've made there in terms of the work to go. I was expecting someone from Invest SK to be here today who will be able to give a detailed answer to that question. And they're not. I mean, I can say the key focus is around exactly that. Oh, Barry, sorry, you can answer that, can you? Great.
I'll
Thanks,
pass that to Councillor Barry Dobson.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, this is a difficult situation with our building above the cinema where we have, it's all fitted out and ready to go. We are tied in with the LEP here on that building, but what we're working with at Invest SK is whether we can actually change this to going down the scale a bit. At the moment, they're sort of university-based courses that were due to be held here, but we think there is much more scope for, learning how to advertise online, do all the internet things that we do, and those sorts of skills for those people who don't want to go to university. And we think there was a great opportunity there working with the local colleges and also probably the schools as well. So, but we have to get permission from the LEP. Otherwise, we will owe them, see if we can keep the money that they've loaned us to do this or supported us and change our tact, basically.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the committee? Councillor Ashley Baxter.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask about the famous page 94, the delivery of leisure centres. Recently, Councillor Dobson wrote that funds and land have now been agreed and we can look forward to a great new centre in Deeping St James. Can anybody explain the delay to date of the delivery of the leisure centre?
Councillor Barry Dobson.
Thank you, Chairman. No, we can't at the moment, I'm afraid. Schemes have been proposed now. The layout of that site for the Deepings has been surveyed. The surveys are in. The plan is there, but we are now got to, because of COVID, it's all been delayed. Prices have gone up tremendously, so we have to relook at what we're going to be able to offer. The scheme for, say, for instance, a 6-lane pool and everything was about 18 million. It's now standing at 22 million. Consequently, also an 8-lane pool would be up to about 26, 27 million. So it all has to be, we not exactly go back to square one, but we have to look at what we can now afford and where that money is going to come from. So no, can't at the moment give a definite date.
But I suppose Councillor Baxter's point is there an ongoing review and when is that expected to report?
The review is ongoing, Chairman. I can't tell you at the moment when we would bring it back, but as soon as we're ready, we will announce that and bring it back in. We are working hard on that.
Will that be before the end of the year?
I certainly hope so, yes.
Okay, are there any other comments and questions on this report? I have a number of comments and questions. First of all, on the format, I think the format would be improved with a cover sheet with all of the targets and the headline status. So I think a cover sheet would improve the actual overall format. In terms of the actual targets, I think it is a mixture of really good targets and some that are there to fill the report out. There's definitely one or two there that I think are not specific enough for my liking, if I'm honest. If I go through them quickly, the St Martin's Park, that one's suspiciously green, given that the first item of our agenda today was to roll forward £66,000 for work that should have happened last year that's going to happen this year. So something must be behind schedule on there. I mean, Richard did detail what that was earlier on. We've no need to cover that. But I would suggest that the headlines are power in some of these reports. There are clearly some things that are running behind on some of these, and I think in a process of openness, we should where things like the £66,000 that we expected to spend last year are going to be spent next year, which are fine. But they should be in this report. I mean, anyone looking at this report wouldn't actually spot that we're a year behind on something we expected to spend last year. On target 2, obviously the funds coming for the future high street funds, that's going to come with strings attached. And I mean, Councillor Dobson and myself have spoken about that, and I know that an ongoing review is happening about what those strings are. I mean, they're not just going to write us a blank check, but I'd kind of like to see a little bit more about when those details are in there, and that they get publicised amongst councillors and amongst the community. Moving on, I think that the other reports are the other ones are excellent. Item 6 is one that I'm particularly happy with. I think that's a really good specific target, which we can independently verify whether we're going to hit that yes or no each year. So I think that's an excellent target. The Southern Relief Road, do we actually have much say in the opening up of the Southern? Is that a target for us, or is that a target for LCC? That strikes me as us talking about targets for LCC rather than ourselves. So whilst it's great for Grantham, I'm not entirely sure it should be part of our targets, but I may be wrong in that. Again, likewise with broadband coverage, maybe we do have a big stake in broadband coverage. If you can come back in a few minutes, I'll just rattle through my questions. The clean and sustainable environment, that was way too high level for me. I think that needs to be built, just that we've agreed some money for a clean environment doesn't feel like a target. I'd like to see what that money's for and how it's going to deliver a clean and sustainable target. Same with high performing council. I'd like to understand that a little bit more. We've spoken about things like adopting some of the savings from the last year or so. I think that's a really good target that we could try and do some savings on there. I've also written for priority number 6 that feels too high level. I was a little bit concerned to see target 8 had basically no targets in it. All of the dates are N/A. I'd like some comments on that, because a target with N/A written on it is not a target in my book. And the asset review, I would just like to understand a little bit more of the scoping of that. But other than that, that kind of details all of my comments. As I say, I do think it's an improvement. A cover sheet would help. Some of the targets are absolutely excellent and will really stand this council in good stead. Some of them, it feels to me, are there to pad the report out. Some of them, I think we need to think a little bit more give a little bit more thought to the detail where there might be a red. So, for example, St Martin's Park's a good example of that. In this meeting alone, we've detailed things that are running behind on that report. On that, nothing terminal, I don't think, but they should be in this report, because in the same meeting as we're rolling over a budget that should have been spent a year ago, we're saying everything's fine on St Martin's Park. When we come to the status, so I think there's more work ahead of you on this, but this is an improvement. I'd welcome you to comment on those observations, please, Ken. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor, and I think I've remembered them all, but if I've missed any, please free to come back. So start off actually with the IT investment roadmap piece. So the reason those N/As are in place is that the first target was to develop the roadmap, which would have then the subsequent milestones and target in it, and that hasn't been achieved. So therefore, it's red. So we haven't got the other things that flow off it. So so secondly, more generally, so with the St Martin's Park, for example, that you picked up, and sorry, I should have highlighted this in my outline of the report. So what we've tried to do is an overall RAG status for the action, and then there's individual indicators or milestones beneath that we've also rated. So we've tried to do that. That's where we've tried to build it in. So we've got a high level action. Is that on track? But actually, they've in most cases got 2, 3, or 4 sub performance indicators that contribute towards that. So that was the intention with that. I think in general terms. So obviously, the process that we went through, we came with the suggested KPIs to the committee in the last committee, which were approved here. The reason that we want to do an annual review of the overall performance, but also of the KPIs, is because we've learned while we're doing this that some of them actually aren't in practice as good as we thought they were when we started out. So all the feedback on that's appreciated, and I think Ben will have noted your feedback on those. And some of them will require different targets and different actions, and some of them will require actually clarification of wording. And just a kind of final point, really, one of the purposes of the performance report is to kind of help guide the forward plan in the programme of the committee. So what we're not intending to do with the performance report is get into huge swathes of detail in any individual target, but because obviously there's a huge amount of them, but actually it should, I hope, it will give enough for the committee to say, actually, we need to know more about this. So it almost provides that kind of metal detector. Do you want to dig in more to this, and do you want to get it onto the forward plan and the future programme going forward? But in general, really appreciate the feedback on that, and that we've identified some of the targets that, as we've started to measure them, think actually we need to tighten this up a bit. So we've noted all that you've said there, and then we'll feed that back into the process. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other comments from the committee? Councillor Dilks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just looking at page 93 on the a target for using local suppliers. Really just a comment, really. I mean, I really welcome that performance indicator in there, and was quite surprised, really, that we've only sort of achieved just over half of that, and would sort of welcome, more of a comment than anything, anything that we can do to increase that achievement, but also wonder what the target will be next year, and why can we increase the target? Is it practical to increase it? I have another question on the leisure centres later.
Just to add to Councillor Dilks's question there, who owns that target and is driving the usage of local suppliers? Which
the finance team, so through their procurement function. So Richard and Alison are the kind of owners of they're the overseers of it. In reality, it relates to all of the procurement activity across the organisation. Richard gave me a look there. I don't know if you saw, to say get yourself right. So, but yeah, in reality, it's finance and procurement oversee it and provide us with the rest of the whole organisation with the tools to enable us to achieve it. So they are the owner of it, but the whole organisation is responsible for acting through its implementation.
So, Richard, now that you own that target, can you comment upon your ownership, please?
Yeah. I mean, the reality is, of course, procurement is decentralised across the organisation. So there isn't one individual that does procurement for the authority. It's a decentralised function across all areas. What I just need to say to Councillor Dilks, of course, is that there is procurement legislation that overrides this. So in the note, it's actually only up to £50,000. Thereafter, it still needs to go through proper procurement process, because ultimately what we're talking about here is taxpayers' money equals value for money. So it may be local suppliers aren't the best placed individuals or organisations to offer us best value. The other thing I would say, Mr. Chairman, is local suppliers is not a defined classification. So actually, we can define ourselves what we mean by local suppliers. And of course, it will mean something different to individuals. Some authorities take it by a district perspective. But if you're in Stamford procuring goods, you might not define Lincolnshire or South Stephen as your local supply chain, because clearly you'll bleed into Cambridgeshire, Leicestershire, etc., etc. So there is, I think, still further work for us as an authority to determine what we all think we mean when we talk about local suppliers. But at the minute, we've taken a relatively crude 20-mile radius of the offices here to mean local suppliers. But I suggest that we'll all have a different view as to what we actually mean by that. But Ken's right to say that it is in our contract procedure rules. It is beholden on every procurement officer, where it's up to 50,000 contract spend, that they must seek and encourage a local supplier to bid for the works. But of course, there may not be an audience for those works. So whilst we can invite a local supplier to bid, they don't necessarily have to do it, and we don't necessarily have to take the price they submit. So it is a relatively complicated area, to be honest, in terms of a very simple indicator.
But I presume you detect the concern that if it's everybody's responsibility, it's nobody's responsibility. But it sounds as if there are some processes in place there. Councillor Dilks.
Yeah, thank you for that explanation. I think it is an interesting thing to look at, and of course we want value for money, and might be a local supplier would be much more expensive than somebody just. I'm a bit concerned with what Richard said. I've got to say about looking at 20 miles from the centre of Grantham. I think that may well exclude many parts of our own district, which is a worry. So I'm sure that's not a strict. Please look at beeping. My other question was on the leisure centres, and it was to Barry. And I'm just sort of looking at the commentary on there. You asked, will we get the update by the end of the year? It actually says in the commentary that the update or a final decision is pending a full review, and it's expected in the summer of 2021. That's now. Or was the summer last week? I can't remember. But my question really on that is, has this council signed off a budget envelope, particularly for the new leisure centre that is planned for the Deepings, but also the other, the improvements to the other leisure centres, the refurbished ones? And it is a parochial thing, but there is concern on the further delays on the 3G pitch, or 3G, 4G, 5G, whatever it's going to be, pitch on the Deepings. And finally, has the council actually reached an agreement yet with the school, Lincolnshire County Council and other interested parties on the demolition, and how broadly on the demolition of the existing swimming pool and sports hall? Thank you. Sorry, Barry.
No, thank you.
Councillor Thompson, if you can give us a quick update, especially on the financial side. I don't want to stray too far into the work of other committees here, but on the financial side, and a quick update on the project, please.
Thanks, Phil, for your question. As far as the school is concerned and that building there, we don't own it. The council own it. There is no agreement between us and the council. It has appeared to be. So there are some complications there, whether we have to pay for this or not. And there are other issues around that, but I can't go into that just now. For the leisure centre, summer's, yes, is upon us, but it has been delayed due to COVID, getting all the prices in. Prices have shot up, as I've just said, by 20% on all materials. We have got an agreement with the Deepings Parish Council and with LCC. If we want to, can put that on that site, then that is there. And the other one was a 3G pitch, which it is. The Football Foundation has run out of money. So they have issued that. There is an ongoing process at the moment with the Football Foundation to see what they can give us and when they can give us it. That's it.
Councillor Knowles.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Back to the local supplier, it occurred to me that Bourne just missed out on the 20 mile, and the majority of the 20 mile would not be in South Kesteven anyway. It would be in Lincoln, Rutland, in North Kesteven, and one or two other places, maybe Leicestershire, Nottinghamshire. But having said that, does that rule apply to the companies, SK Invest and other companies that are not included in this? I recall that when the Cycle, go back to the Cycle Festival, and everything else was going on when SK Invest had a lot of money, they never even consulted with Warners of Bourne, who are one of the biggest printers and distributors of publications in the country. They never even got to Warners of Bourne for any of their early publications. We had to chase and chase and chase before they ever consulted with one of the biggest operators in the country, who just happened to be 21 miles away from here. But, does it apply to the SK Invest?
We may be straying into some of the territory of the company's committee here. Perhaps, Richard, if you want to clarify the 20 mile thing, I think that'll probably be helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, are there any other questions on the plan from the Councillor Whittington?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Going to looking at number 12, bottom of page 93 and top of 94, the asset management review. Ken, obviously, you know, we're in a situation now where for last sort of 15, 18 months, a lot of our staff have been working from home, and we've not been sort of utilising all of the office capacity as well. And I'm just wondering, we spoke about this earlier, but in terms of the review, are we looking at all of the properties that we own in terms of office blocks as well? Because I'm just thinking, I know a lot of councils, in fact, a lot of organisations are currently looking at their sort of model of how their staff work now, and a lot of them are moving towards more home-based working, and are starting to actually question whether or not they need the same sort of large offices and capacity that they've previously had. And are starting to realise that actually there's potentially a lot of overhead that could very well be saved by sort of having more staff working from home, converting offices into sort of hot working areas so that people who do need to be in the office can be there. I'm just wondering if it's part of this, if this is something that SK is looking at, because you know, potentially, as we mentioned earlier, when we're looking at in the fund's performance, you know, we saved £146,000 in a lot of admin stuff. I'm just wondering what level of savings potentially could be there, because obviously, you know, we do know that going forward, we do have some quite significant budget pressures in terms of our recurrent budgets going forward. I just wondering potentially if any work's been done around looking for savings, because obviously every pound we save on overhead costs means that we can reinvest that pound into key frontline services. So some comments around that would be quite useful. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Ken?
Yeah, no, I can come back on that unless the cabinet member wants to say anything. I can respond to that, so that's fine. Yeah, no. So the answer is the scope of the review is all of the non-HRA assets, so it includes the operational portfolio, and generally we are exploring. We have been exploring ways of adapting and modernising working practices, which includes office environments, and balancing the need and ability to save money with the operational requirements of the organisation. So the short answer to the question is yes, those are in scope, and yes, there is some work that's taken place around that. Yeah, no, I hope that helps, Councillor. But I can't give the. But yeah, so the answer is yes.
Councillor Whittington.
I just wonder, Mr. Chairman, that obviously falls under the corporate services part of the remit of this committee. I'm just wondering if maybe we could schedule a report in the work programme in the autumn, perhaps, or.
I think there's some overlap with that and the report we discussed earlier on about the lessons of best practices from the last 18 months. But yeah, we can discuss that outside of this. And if the scope of that report needs widening or a second report, I'm certainly happy to add that to our work programme. Are there any other comments from the committee about this report? Okay, Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Chair. Following on from your comment about the relief road, the gaping hole in this report, I believe, is the Garden Village. It does get a mention in that paragraph, but as far as I'm aware, the Garden Village of umpteen thousand houses remains a fantasy.
You bring us on well to the review of the targets that's been requested from I mean, that was also occurred to me that the earlier point that raised about the amount of houses being built and the amount of budget towards these houses, those targets are not reflected in these. Ken, did you want to comment on that before we talk about the review session? Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. Thanks, Councillor. It's the Garden Village stuff falls within the scope of rural overview and rural and communities overview and scrutiny committee. So that it is referenced in the performance report to that committee, but it's outside of the scope of this committee for the purposes of this. But it's helpful comment. Thank you.
Okay, so before we wrap this item up, if there are no other comments, it's been proposed that we do a review of these targets. Some of them are stronger than others, as we've detailed before. Now, some dates have been floated. I'm going to propose that we do this review after the meeting on the 20th instead of the 26th, 27th, the dates that have been suggested, simply because I believe that there's more availability. Do you have any comments from members of the committee to do this after our meeting on the 20th? Our meeting on the 20th has a relatively light agenda. Are we okay to do this on the 20th rather than the 26th? I think we're all happy with that. Great, so we'll do that. We'll undertake that review of these targets, the sub-classifications, the strength of the targets after that. I'd like to make some progress. So moving on, item 10, the work programme. Quite a number of items have come out today about the work programme. I believe Adita's been writing them all down, which is great. So we'll look at those later. Does anybody else have any other comments on the work programme or for the work programme? Councillor Dilks.
Just specifically, obviously affordable homes, delivery of affordable homes was on the unscheduled items, and we haven't got anything on September the 7th as yet in there, and I would just make a bid for the delivery of affordable homes in the district to be an item on the 7th of September.
Thank you for that, Mark, and I will discuss with officers to see whether that's realistic. Do we have any other comments and questions about the work programme? No. Okay, so I'd like, so moving on to item 11, are there any other items of business in the room? Okay, with no other items of business, it's now 12:20, so I shall declare this meeting closed. Thank you everyone today for